All right.
Okay. So, hi.
Hi. Hi.
To start off with, would you like to say your name and where you are?
Yep. So I'm Eden Brown. I'm in Melbourne,
Mhm.
Australia. So yes, I'm on Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nations. So those are our traditional custodians of the land that I reside on. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
And the first question is, who are you? I mean, who are you as a person, as a human being? Like your values, interests, passions, whatever you'd like to present about yourself.
Mhm. I'm a person of color. I'm a queer person of color, and I'm a trans non-binary queer person of color. And so I guess I stated it in that way because those intersections are really important about my identity, and that's how I'm perceived by others in the world. Um, and it's shaped my experience. So um, yeah, I think on a social cultural level that's who I am. Um, in terms of traits, I guess I I'm an intuitive person. Most people are, but that's how I lead. Um, that's I guess my process and the way that I perceive the world is largely through intuition. Um, I'm an introverted person, um, so I do need a fair bit of time on my own. Uh, I'm a get there late, leave early person because I deplete quite quickly. Um,
Mm-hmm.
although although when people get to know me, they do think that I'm extroverted, so I can show up as quite sort of loud and boisterous. Um, but yeah, I do need a lot of time on my own. Um,
Mm-hmm.
who else am I? Yeah, I guess I'm a I really value altruism, so altruism is really important. Um, and I guess in that sort of manifests in my life as service. So
Okay.
right into service. So I've been working in community development, international development prior to coming to Gestalt, and I've worked in social work as well. So that's yeah, that's the place where I feel I feel like I'm contributing to something, and I also receive back from. So yeah, yeah, I guess that sort of altruism is really important for me in what I value. Um, music is very important in my life.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I play a few instruments. I play the guitar, the piano, the drums. And so that's sort of my go-to to recharge when I am on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and uh, um, and I guess I'm a student too. So I'm a student of Gestalt. So I'm currently in training in my third year.
Mm-hmm.
But so I guess also though on a broader level, I guess it sounds so cliched, but I'm a student of life. I love to learn. Um, I guess I'm a curious person. Um, yeah, yeah. So that's. Oh, I guess yeah. And I'm a Pacific Islander, so that's really an important part of I guess my identity and how I show up in the world, and I guess the values as a Pacific Islander. Yeah, there's a real sense of pride about who we are as a people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the important values of um, Pacific Island culture and Samoan culture is love, respect, service. No surprise there, but service is a big part
Mm-hmm.
of our identity and community, and family. So we're very sort of collectivist people, and even though I'm an introvert, yeah, I have to regulate that. But as an introvert, I still feel very much part of a collective. Yeah.
Hmm. Now,
Mhm.
this is a question I don't usually ask people, but you said you are a Pacific Islander. but you're in Australia. Does that mean that you're also a migrant, or is that an ancestry kind of question?
Yeah. I guess I am a migrant. Yeah, I don't perceive myself as a migrant. Because I've got the accent. I don't know if that comes across.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So I've got a pretty Australian accent, and when I'm overseas, I'm perceived as an Australian.
Of
Uh,
course.
he, here in Australia, I guess I'm perceived as a New Zealander.
Okay.
So, or yeah, uh, or a Pacific Islander, New Zealander more so. Uh, Within my family in New Zealand or in Samoa, I'm an Australian. So
Okay.
it really depends who I'm with. But in terms of the migrant experience, I think you know, so my parents. So we arrived here in Melbourne, Australia, in 1986. So I was 6 years of age, and both parents. So my parents had separated, and both parents had repartnered. My mother partnered with an Australian man, my stepfather, and my father partnered with a French woman, my stepmother. So
Hmm.
she's French, and so yeah. In terms of I don't know. Yeah, there's a sort of a multicultural event. There was something special about that even then
Mm-hmm.
that I was able to identify. But I think my relationship with my stepfather, who I spent the majority of the week with, um, weekends with my father and stepmother, he's Australian, so I think I feel like that experience of being a migrant was sort of muted in a way. Yeah, and and I kind of became Australian. Well, Australian seems strange. These days I'm more identify as being a Melburnian uh,
Okay.
rather than Australian.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
I didn't mean to make you pick. I was just curious
yeah,
about the plurality. So.
right. Yeah. I guess I wasn't. I guess wasn't trying to pick. That was just my process, really about like,
Mhm.
yeah, that's kind of how it sort of unfolded. Initially it was Australian. No, actually, no, it's not Australian, but yeah, I do identify more as a Melburnian because the experience has been a cosmopolitan city, very different, say, to a sort of regional, rural Australia. I don't know what that experience uh, is
Hmm.
like. Mm,
Okay. All right.
yeah.
So, another question, I'm sure more parts of you will continue to come out. I never worry about that.
Yeah.
Another
Mm.
question is what comes to mind as a particular event in your life or as a set of circumstances that you've lived that you would say really shaped or influenced who you are?
I think it was just the probably my step parents uh, coming into I guess that really my step parents were a huge change in my life, transformed the way that I perceived the world and encountered the world. So these were two different worldviews that came, one European, one Australian, and then our Pacific Islander culture. So it was this. Sort of an opening. It's kind of opened my thinking and being curious and more and interested in other cultures as well, not just my own. Yeah, I think that kind of. I don't think I was aware of it then, but I think that spurred my interest in working in international development, politics. Um, so that would be um, an event, I guess. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Okay. And also, I mean, maybe it's these same people, I don't know. But
Mm-hmm.
another question is who comes to mind as a person who has really had an impact on you in your life?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question. I'm gonna have to say, so this is somebody I haven't met, but I've read a lot of her work, which was Bell Hooks,
Mm,
or is Bell Hooks. I was traveling overseas, and I came back to Melbourne feeling really, and I'd worked, and I was feeling really conflicted about. I guess, colonial power that was still present in these kind of development projects. And so I came back really confused about what I was doing in the work that I was doing in international
Okay.
development. It wasn't making sense. I was questioning the agenda in the work and the funding bodies. And so, yeah, I was in a really low place. And I picked up Bell Hooks's book, A Pedagogy of Hope,
Mm.
teaching community. Um, and yeah, and I was able to experience a compassion for the other, um, the oppressor or that colonial power. I was able to be compassionate about that, but also find the compassion within myself and attend to my own sort of internalized racism, uh, capitalist self. So yeah, bell hooks that totally, yeah, opened my mind. Yeah. hmm
So how old were you when you found that work?
I was 28,
Hmm.
so late. Yeah.
Well, hopefully you have lots of time ahead of you, so that shouldn't be late in the large scheme of things. But
Yeah. Right.
yeah,
Well,
I
I'm
was just
40,
curious.
40 now.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Mm,
I was curious
yeah.
because sometimes, I mean, we find books at some of the most unusual times. Sometimes things that are, not appropriate for your chronological age, but just
Right.
really drop in at the right moment. But
Yeah. And
and
that's what
how
happened for me.
and
Mm,
how did sort of that perspective impact you
mm,
as a person? I mean, you've talked a bit about what it sort of made you reflect on.
mm,
Um, but what about in your person? Understanding the internalized sort of racism. Do you
mm.
want to say anything more about any of that?
Yeah. Well, it helped me to be able to start to examine, um, uh, how the voices that I had internalized about myself. I became more empowered about who I am, what I represent to others, um, and an ability to be able to stand in myself and also be proud of who I was. I come from a proud culture of Pacific Islanders, and coming into um, coming into I guess. Or encountering environments where I'm experiencing racism or sexism, I guess I became quite polarized in my thinking, um, and I didn't enjoy that either. I did not like the fact that I didn't like the fact that I was there was I didn't like that I was looking at people in a way that evoked hate, essentially, which is pretty
Wow.
strong. Um,
Yeah.
and that, yeah, and that, and I've got two step parents, one French, white, French, European, Anglo-Saxon, white, stepfather. And so, yeah, there was just this kind of dissonance that was happening, within me going, I don't like that I'm hating this. So how do I reconcile this within myself? And that book, sort of compassion, working with others, that there is a way through, and that is through compassion and understanding and non-violent communication, essentially. Um, yeah, and so I guess that was really transformative for me in my process, because what was happening out there, I had to do, the inner stuff within myself. So, yeah.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mm.
Did that make
And
sense?
did you find that a lot of the work, yeah, it did, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just going
Mm.
to ask if you found that a lot of the work was on yourself or whether, maybe this is a very personal question, but whether your
Mm.
family was also understanding those kinds of things or whether that was sort of your own path.
Mm-hmm. Uh, I think a lot of it was internal, in processing it internally. I think. Um, yeah, I don't know whether it is because I'm more introverted, or I just process things internally mostly. That I need to get that. Yeah, I have a tendency to. I need to process it here first before I go out and trial it out. So it was very
Mhm.
much an internal process, and I had to look to books because I didn't want any interference to really interrupt that process. that was going on for me. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
you really just actually made me wonder, okay, I wonder how my kids are going to do this because I'm the white Anglo-Canadian mom to Mexican Canadian children. I'm like,
right.
oh, I'm that damned colonial oppressor parent. Shit. That was not my
Right.
intention, but
Hmm.
it is a dynamic in my own family, but I'm on the other part
Hmm.
of it. So,
Yeah, yeah,
hmm,
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
just take that away and process that
Right.
somewhere. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It is. You know, because for me it was, oh, it's out there. It's what they're doing to me. And you know, and the
Mhm,
reality is that is. I've experienced that. I encountered that the system's set up in that way. But also, I think it was. It's also about um, you know, what I've also internalized from that, and then how I've treated myself in that. Like
mhm,
that process had to happen before I could then encounter the world again, because I just hit such a low about that, and you know, my own experience growing up is that no, like white people aren't dangerous. White people aren't always out there to get me. In fact, they've loved, they've reared me. You know, there's an unconditional love for that. They've stood up for me. They've advocated for me. And so, yeah, I just had to. Yeah, that was it. Had to then become an inner process.
mhm.
Um, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Did you want to say something else, or would you like me to?
Well, yeah, I think you know, we did a lovely workshop with uh, so with We Are Lee, which is an Aboriginal organisation we've got at our training institute here in Melbourne, at Gestalt Therapy Australia, and it was this work. That was happening. You know, I might have done it a little bit early, but it was that was the work where, you know, that it's not the oppressed that need to do the work. It's the oppressed aren't the problem. It's, you know, it's those who are in power or have those powers. They need to do the work and heal that. So I guess, you know, I know something about that. Yeah, too. Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm trying. I still get a lot of things very, very wrong, but I am trying.
So do
Yeah,
I. So
yeah,
do I. Yeah,
yeah.
you know, with gender, you know, having an education, you know, being able-bodied, you know, there's a lot outside of my awareness that I need to constantly be on top of and try to be aware of too. So, yeah, I
Mhm.
get that.
Yeah, that actually is my next question. And some people choose not to answer this just because they don't really want to identify or declare anything about themselves this way.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is, how do you experience yourself within your gender? And whether Gestalt has had anything to do with that process or not.
Mm-hmm.
You can answer that however you'd like, if or not.
Yes, I'd love to answer that question. It's because it's a big part of how I show up in the world, and it's been a big part of my experience. So, um, are you there? There you are. Okay, thought
Yeah.
I lost you there for a moment. Yeah, so you know, I'm a trans non-binary person. Um, I'm a trans masculine non-binary person, and so I've only really I came out and had processed this only 2 years ago. Uh, so I'm 40. So that's a lot of time to have not attended to that, and so for for 30 odd years, I've identified as a woman, you know, and so I understand the experience of what it is to be a woman in that gender. Um, and I guess actually, so my own therapy and Gestalt, actually the group that I was in and the training that I was in, the workplace that I was in as well, like there were all these field conditions that allowed me to show up authentically and actually sort of, yeah, examine and look at that in a safe way. And so, you know, I came out at the end of my first year of training in my workplace within my training group and have just had a lot of support around that. Um, and the support's been amazing, actually. Um, you know, I've you know, experienced, I've experienced, dysphoria, body dysphoria, for 30 years, but I've had so many other things to sort of competing sort of things or needs that needed to be attended to, and gender was something that was sort of, I guess, constantly being set aside. And I guess I needed to experience that safety, know that it was safe enough too in the community to do that. Um, so so great now, fantastic
Yeah.
now. I experience a euphoria in my body when I am seen the way that you know that I perceive and see myself. And I think those intersections I was talking about before are really important too, because as a trans, non-binary person of color, who is queer as well, I guess that compound, those elements compound, and so
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Uh, I guess that, and from that, I'm also hypersensitive. I guess women are quite sensitive and can be hypersensitive when they're not being seen, or they're being missed, or they're being
Mm-hmm.
ignored. Similarly, that's my experience as well, and sometimes it can be fourfold. At the moment, though, um, to be trans or to be non-binary in some ways is popular, uh, which is great because that's allowed me to come. It's well in some circles it's become a bit of a I don't know. It's people are interested and they're curious about that, I guess, um, which is good for me because that allows me to be who I am and be safe in that. Um, uh, but at the same time, I do have anxiety about, when that goes away. Similar to when I came out, as a queer person, it was at a time too that it was safe, and then it wasn't safe anymore.
Mm.
So it does go through uh, dips and turns. But I guess coming out as a lot of my experience too is as a woman. I think that's really important for me to say. And I've always sought women out to for support, um, to share our shared experiences, usually negative ones, but it's a way of that solidarity.
It's the trauma bonding. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and so and I still do that. I still feel, I still seek out women to get that solidarity and support. But however, I have built around me a beautiful trans non-binary community, um,
Hmm.
who are so, yeah, so considered, so supportive, so generous, with sharing their knowledge in how to handle daily practicalities of being trans and being non-binary.
Mhm. You say you have built a community. Do you mean you've connected with people, or do you actually have like an organized sort of community system
Mm,
that is like,
mm. Well, I say built because no, I haven't built an organization. I say built because I build for myself. I've supported
okay,
myself
yeah, I
by
was just,
seeking and return.
yeah.
Yeah. And so, but no, there are organizations here in Melbourne and Victoria and overseas, online.
Yeah.
We also meet in person. So that have been, I yeah, that have supported me so much. Yeah. Um,
I'm
in
glad to
being
hear
able
that.
to come out. Yeah.
I hear, a lot of the other side of that, of people not finding support in therapy. So,
Yeah. Well, therapy and the Gestalt group and the workplace I came out in my workplace. Thankfully, I was a social worker there at the time, and The support that I got was it was amazing. The organisation stepped in, HR took it upon, human resources took it upon themselves to learn about, pronouns and what's gender and then disseminated the information. So then, that I would feel comfortable, in being in that space. Yeah, so I'm very fortunate in that way. I know that the experience of a lot of trans, non-binary people, yeah, that's just not a possibility to come out. Um, but yeah, I don't know where I'm going. I feel like I'm rambling here. I'm not
No,
sure.
no. I mean, I
Feels
asked
like a bit
very
very
open
focused.
questions. So
Yes,
wherever
right.
you'd like to leave it,
Yeah.
I mean, that's fine. It was just
Uh-huh.
a question about how you experience your gender. And it sounds like
Yeah,
it is a
yeah.
complex and very rich experience.
Yeah, it is. It is. That's right. Yeah, I guess also, something I'd like to talk about. So I currently work as a counsellor with men,
Hmm.
and I'm a family violence counsellor, yeah, so gender is a big part of my work, and also being, often when I speak with men, they ask what my gender is, and that's been a really um, it's been a really special experience, when I can say I'm trans and I'm non-binary, because we know that violence is gendered, or family violence is gendered, and and I've been a bit reticent about how do I share that sort of information.
Right.
Is it appropriate to share that? But often I'm asked, are you a man or are you a woman? Like, yeah, because depending on the time of day, my voice and the tone of my voice, because I do phone work, changes. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And so, in terms of how I experience my gender in that context, I feel like it's a bit of a gift in the work that I do. Uh, because then we can talk about gender, and talk about how it might limit us, in the way we interact with the world, the way that we relate with others.
Hmm.
Because often the question when I'm asked, "Are you a man or are you a woman?" is, why is it important for you to know that I'm a man or a woman? What is it about that?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, and
we get
very
into
much more about the comfort of the other person being able to tick one box or the other, right?
that's right. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So, and what they want to know is, how do I relate to you? And how much power? I think about power.
Mm.
How much power do I give you? How much power can I have in this moment? And how we interact with each other. So that's something that really interests me, and I'm really
Hmm.
passionate about gender in that respect, and especially in when we're using it in a family violence lens. Yeah,
Hmm.
asked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So maybe taking a little bit off the more personal side of things, I
Yeah.
would also like to know about your relationship with Gestalt. How did you guys meet? How did that go?
Hmm.
How did you come into Gestalt?
Yep. So I'd probably say, yeah, intuitively, I felt intuitively led to Gestalt, because I didn't know much about Gestalt. I did see the Gloria videos like everybody else, and I was like, yeah, and I was I didn't really like I didn't really like Fritz Perl's approach, but I could see what was important about eliciting something from somebody that was authentic. So I really liked that. But apart from that, I think I Googled, I was interested in psychotherapy because I've been working in social work, and did a lot of therapeutic work in social work. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe counselling. And I just typed, I think I typed like person-centered, present, somatic, uh, and then I typed the suburb, and and then that the training institute, so Gestalt Therapy Australia, popped up, and it was not far from where I lived, as well.
Keyword search skills are so important. They really are.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Uh, the website popped up, and I was like, wow, yeah, this sounds like very much me, especially sort of, I guess, philosophically, and already of, what works for me.
Mhm.
And the key word was experiential, for me when I read that. I thought, oh, yeah, because I didn't want to go back into a university style setting, and so being, experiential was really important. And so, yeah, so I looked at that, and I just, like, I really didn't put a whole lot of thinking. Just went, yep, that's me, fine. Bang, sent off the application, met with a member of faculty, and I went, wow, this I really, yeah. So it was all very much feel and intuitive. Yeah, no, this feels right for me. That feels right. And the more, now that I'm, in training, yeah, just yeah, I just find just how affirming it is to my own way of experiencing the world.
Hmm.
It's like the perfect fit. So, um, hmm, that's how I came to Gestalt.
And
Long
what is it? Can you say a bit more about what you've actually found there? I mean, have you found a particular piece of theory or a feeling or part of the philosophy or something that just keeps you there and reaffirms that this is what you're interested in?
hmm Yeah, I guess the dialogical principles, like, yeah, I guess those pillars are really important. The dialogical, philosophy, the I thou, Martin Buber's I thou, the ability to show up authentically and connect, really resonated with me. And it's sort of, I did a fair bit of meditation practices and attended retreats, for 10 years leading up to that. So, yeah, that made sense to me.
Hmm.
The figure ground, really resonant. I'm like, yes, this is how I see my experience, especially my intuitive process. That's yeah, that was able to really, yeah, put words around my own experience, and how I see that.
Hmm.
Um, the somatic work was really important too, in terms of the, look, I could talk about like, I'm basically going through all the principles, but yeah, like, it all really
You like the
resonates
whole
with me.
thing.
I love the whole thing. It just makes so much sense. And in engaging with faculty, and as soon as, when I sent, that application off, I started, all these Gestalt therapists in the social work started to pop up around me, and I was
Oh.
like, yeah. And there's something about, Gestalt, the Gestalt therapist, the community. There's something really grounded about, how they show up in the world and their authenticity. There's something solid, that was obvious to me, very different from other people that I met. So, that resonated with me as well. Probably just a sense of tribe, I guess, and community. Yeah.
Yeah, just I mean, just because you mentioned that, I'm curious what that means to you, like the sense of Gestalt community. Do you feel like you're part of the Gestalt community? What is that?
Yes, I think yeah, definitely. And so there is just the only really real contact that I've, face-to-face contact that I've had is been within my institute, and then,
Mhm.
different Gestalt practitioners, in the social work sector. But when I read Lynn Jacobs, Gordon Wheeler, and I read their work, it just makes so much. I'm like, these are my people. You know, they see the world the way that I see the world, and they inform my world and enrich my world. So I feel, even though I haven't made contact, I know you're all out there, um,
Yes.
and I do, even as an introvert, would like to connect with more Gestalt people around the world. So
Even
yeah.
as an introvert and as an Australian, I mean, that's
Mm.
things are not usually conveniently located in your time zone.
This is
That's
true.
that's
Yeah.
difficult as well.
Mhm.
But I'm glad that you feel that you found that.
Yeah.
So another question is, I mean, what do you see yourself doing with this? I don't, because at first you said, oh, I'm just a trainee. Do I want to interview? It's like, yeah. So I'll frame it in time in terms of what are you doing with Gestalt, or what do you see yourself doing with Gestalt in the future?
Mm. Yeah. Well, I'm a trainee, and I'm just started in, interning at the clinic, so very fresh. But I'm interested in, group work, and I'm interested in, Gestalt in working in the sort of family violence sector. I don't, you know, I haven't really explored it that much, but I'd like to see, that sort of Gestalt group work in the family violence sector, working with men who use violence or people who use violence. Um, what else? I Yeah, it just I feel like it's. I wish it was more accessible. I didn't know about Gestalt until I googled. I didn't know that that it really existed prior. And even in my interactions with others, when I say, oh, they're like, what are you studying? I'm like, I'm studying Gestalt therapy. Like, what's that? Like, a lot of people just don't know what it is. So, my hopes for how of Gestalt therapy is that it is more accessible. Um, to people. Um, yeah, maybe around the languaging or something like that.
Yeah, I
Mm.
don't think we can rebrand at this time. I think we have to stick with Gestalt as a word,
Yeah,
even though nobody really gets it right away. But
yeah, mm-hmm.
yeah, I think we can
Yeah,
expand on that and make it a little more accessible. I very much
mm-hmm.
agree with that. So
Mm-hmm.
another question for you is
Yeah,
swinging back a bit to the more personal, is how you would say Gestalt has affected you as a person.
mm-hmm. Yeah, um, yeah. I think it's yeah, showing up in the world, being more authentic. Um, I guess a lot of our training too is taking those risks. Um, Yeah, and so doing this interview is a risk. I thought, oh, it's typical Gestalt. I might as well, yeah, do it. Let's do that. So yeah, taking risks to have my voice heard, show up in my authenticity. So that's huge, I think, for me. Yeah.
Hmm. And would you say that you've run into any particular challenges, either within Gestalt or if there's anything in another context in your life that you'd prefer to talk about, that's fine as well. Just
hmm
what challenges have you really run up against?
hmm Um, I think what happens in challenges that I experience in Gestalt are challenges that I experience in the broader community, the broader society. But what I do think is, the Gestalt way is that at least we can have a conversation about that and we can work through
Mm,
things. Yeah, that repair work in Gestalt is so beautiful. That willingness to dialogue around things. So that's not really. Is that a challenge? Yeah, in a way, that's a challenge. But there's a framework that we can work within. Um,
yes.
hmm, yeah, that's. Um, yeah, and I guess yeah, as you say, being in Australia, I don't know. Is it? I don't know what happens overseas. Do you all hang out together? Like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to hang out with my European friends on Zoom, but then I can't hang out with my European friends and my Australian friends at the same time, except for like a 1 hour time window.
right,
So, and that's usually when my kids wake up and the dogs go crazy. So,
right,
yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I guess there is some sort of isolation of being so far away. I know that there's connections here with we have GANs here in our end of the world, and yes, I know there are practitioners in New Zealand as well. But yeah, I'd like to stretch my legs. Once I get through this course, I'm just just trying to get through
Yeah.
clinic and study for the next year. So I've just got next year as well, and then I feel like I could probably play a little bit more, but I am trying to build some connections. So yeah.
Wonderful. So another question is actually what comes to mind as sort of a highlight or a peak moment in your experience? And I mean, really, you can answer that from any aspect of your life, or even, from a clinical or a gestalt or a training perspective, however you'd like.
Peak. Well, I would say would I would have to say, and it's just because it's so recently is yeah, my first client in the clinic. Peak moment. I remember walking through to the clinic and being welcomed in by the staff there and the manager, and I was like, they're like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm living the dream. this is this
I
is what
imagine
I'm
like Rocky coming down, you know.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and just after that first session, it was a real peak moment. I guess that whole day felt like a peak moment in my life. Yeah.
Hmm. So you're doing social work and you come into therapy. So is this actually, I'm just trying to sort of figure out more words, I guess, for the peak experience. Was that because you were really doing what you wanted to be doing, or what made it particularly special?
Yes, I think it was. Yeah, so I've worked as a social worker, and then this has been my first year of counselling. So I do counselling, and then yeah. So, but this is my first sort of therapy experience. Being therapist, and being a Gestalt therapist, and putting that hat on, even though I'm completely just terrified. I was absolutely terrified.
You're
But
terrified, but I love the way that your face lights up. That's awesome.
yeah. But yeah, to play therapist. That was yeah. Just because it had been like I knew that I wanted to do some kind of therapeutic work. Do my own therapy. I was like, yeah, that looks really good. Yeah, and then just everything just locked in, and it was just yeah. Yeah, it's just yeah, realizing something that I've been dreaming about. That's I guess that's what made it a peak moment, and really savoring it and experiencing it. So yeah,
That
pretty,
sounds lovely. I'm that sounds like a really lovely experience.
it was
So
yeah.
I'm well, I'm wondering if there's anything else in particular that you would like to add. I am kind of curious because you said you were coming from a development kind of context at one point,
Hmm.
and I'm wondering,
Yeah.
do you see any connections between Gestalt and wider social context work or development work, hopefully in a decolonized concept of development would be lovely. Um,
Hmm.
do you see those connections, or is that not something that you're even looking at this point in your life?
Oh, oh yes, I've thought about it a lot. Yeah, actually, how do we bring these Gestalt principles into uh, politics? Into how do we communicate with community? How do we, you know, how do people who want to help other people? What ethic can they bring to their practice when they enter communities or when they're engaging Indigenous communities? It that kind of equalizing, how can you equalize the power there, or how do we talk about power? How can we think about how we share power? And I think Gestalt has a lot to offer in that space, absolutely, in how we relate with one another. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and oh, yeah, I could go on about that, but yeah, I agree. I've thought about it in but I don't know if somebody's already doing that. Someone could already be doing that in the space. Do you know of anybody?
I think some of us are very clumsily trying, and some people have
Right.
been doing organizational development work
Mm,
in conjunction with development work,
mhm,
like
mhm,
working with the organizing principles and the organizations that structure development projects.
mhm,
So,
mhm. Right.
yeah, there are some infiltrators, but
Great.
not not the whole list. So, I guess the last question that I really have is where do you see yourself going? I mean, you said you want to get through the next year. That's great. I think a lot of us want to
Mm,
just get through the next year at this
yeah.
point. But what kind of projects do you see for yourself in the future, especially around Gestalt?
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, I guess uh, yeah, I do want to go into private practice, or start a bit of a small private practice. I want to continue doing agency work. I think I'll always do agency work. Uh, and But similar to what we've talked about, how do we bring Gestalt into the family violence space, or into development? How do you I don't know really where, but I'd like to see that be utilised in organisations, especially where there is especially when there's power differentiation that's great, you know. Yeah, and as well as in trans, I think Gestalt also attract a lot of queer folk. I think there's a big LGBTQI contingency. So and so I'm curious about that work, and I'd like to connect more
Mhm.
and find out what's happening. You know, where are we at? Yeah, uh,
Yes.
rather than just studying. Yeah.
Huh.
Mhm.
Wonderful. So, is there anything else that you'd like to add? Is there anything you feel like I've left out about, your person, your history, or any particular message?
Uh, no, that feels about right. But I do just want to thank you, yeah, for the opportunity to meet and connect today. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
No, I do too. I mean, sometimes people just send us a message and we just jump on them and invite them to interview. It's like, if you're
Yeah.
interested, we're
Yeah.
interested in you too. So thank
Right.
you for letting us
Yeah.
do that, because sometimes I
Mhm.
guess that can be a little overwhelming, but
Mhm.
we're just
Yes.
really curious.
Yeah. Yeah. Naturally, that's great. No, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
thank you. If that's okay with you, then I guess we will leave it here.
Yeah.
Perfect.